Eloan Grant didn't rush into room 12 the way the other first graders did. Most mornings at Cedar Hollow Elementary started like a small, harmless storm. Velcro sneakers ripping open, lunchboxes thumping onto desks, kids calling out names like they were tossing paper airplanes. Bram Kessler had already written the date on the whiteboard and set out the morning tubs. Crayons sorted by color, a stack of picture books about winter animals, a tray of sharpened pencils that never stayed sharpened for long. He was halfway through untangling a set of headphones when the noise shifted, just slightly, the way it does when one child walks in carrying something heavier than a backpack. Eloan stepped inside as if the doorway had teeth. Her backpack was still on, straps tight on her shoulders. She didn't look up at the alphabet banner, didn't glance at the fish tank the kids loved, didn't wave at the cluster of girls near the cubbies. She went straight to her desk and stopped standing behind her chair like the chair had done something wrong. Bram noticed because he'd trained himself to notice. Not in a paranoid way. In a teacher way. 6 years in elementary classrooms had taught him that the smallest details were usually the loudest ones. A kid who suddenly stopped talking, a kid who started chewing their sleeves, a kid who flinched when you raised your hand to point at the board. Eloan, he said gently, keeping his voice in that soft morning register so he wouldn't turn every head. Good morning. She nodded without looking at him. The other kids slid into their seats. Chairs scraped. A boy laughed too loudly. Someone dropped a water bottle and it rolled under a table. The room snapped into the usual rhythm. Eloan stayed standing. Bram walked closer, slow enough not to spook her. He crouched at her height, resting one hand on the edge of her desk so he looked like he belonged there, like he wasn't about to become a problem she had to solve. Do you need help with your backpack? He asked. Or do you want to hang it up first? Eloan swallowed. Her eyes were fixed on the carpet between her shoes, the pattern of faded squares like it was the only safe thing in the room. I can't sit, she whispered. It came out thin, almost breathless, like she'd been holding it back since she woke up. Bram blinked once, not because he didn't understand, but because a sentence like that out of a 6-year-old, at 8 in the morning meant 100 possible things. A pulled muscle. A fall. A Stommerschache. A prank. A fear. Or something else. Something that lived in the space between words. He kept his face calm. He kept his voice light. Teachers learned to do that even when their thoughts started running. You can stand for morning work if you want, he said. No rule says you have to sit right this second. Eloan's shoulders loosened by a millimeter, but her hands tightened around her backpack straps. Bram didn't reach for her. He didn't touch her without permission. That was another thing they taught you: boundaries and safety, especially with children who already seemed like the world had been too handsy with them. Where does it hurt? He asked quietly, as if he was asking about a scraped knee. Eloan's mouth trembled. She shook her head like she didn't want to point. It down here, she said, and her voice dropped even lower. It hurts when I sit. The words landed in Bram's chest with the dull weight of a stone. He didn't let himself react the way his body wanted to react. He didn't let himself show the jolt of alarm, the sudden cold sweep up his spine. He knew what the phrase "hurts when I sit" could mean. He also knew that guessing projecting could harm a child in a different way if he handled it wrong. So he did what good teachers do when the stakes are too high. He made the next step small, safe, and clear. Okay, he said. Thank you for telling me. You're not in trouble. I'm glad you told me. Eloan's eyes flicked up for half a second, like she was checking whether that sentence was a trap. Bram nodded toward the quiet corner by the bookshelf where a beanbag chair and a small table sat under a paper sign that read "Calm Corner" in crooked marker. Do you want to stand over there for a minute? Where it's not so busy? He asked. We can get you comfortable without everybody watching. Eloan hesitated, then stepped carefully toward the corner, moving stiffly, like each shift of her weight required planning. Bram watched her gait the way you'd watch a child carry a full cup of water ready to catch what spills, pretending you're not watching too hard. He turned to the class with his practiced smile. "All right, Cedar Hollow crew," he announced, clapping softly twice. "Morning tubs. Pick one." Whisper voices. The kids scattered toward the activity bins like squirrels. The room returned to its normal buzzpaper sliding, crayons tapping, small arguments about whose turn it was. Bram took advantage of that cover the way a lifeguard uses waves. He walked to his desk, picked up his phone, and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights outside always made everything look slightly too pale. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and cafeteria syrup. Bram stood by the bulletin board displaying student art and stared at a construction paper snowman while his thumb hovered over the contacts list. He'd taken the mandated reporter training every August. He'd clicked through the slides, answered the quiz questions, listened to the warnings, "Don't investigate. Don't promise secrecy. Document facts. Report suspicions." The training always felt abstract, like learning how to use a fire extinguisher in a room that had never caught fire. Now his hands were sweating, and every second he waited felt like choosing the wrong ending. He dialed the school office first. The secretary answered with the same upbeat voice she used for parents who called about lost hoodies. "This is Cedar Hollow. How can I help you?" "It's Bram Kessler in room 12, he said, keeping his voice controlled. "I need Nurse Willa to come to my room quietly. It's urgent, but not a scene." A pause. The tone on the other end changed the way adults' tones always changed when they recognized real urgency. "I'll send her," the secretary said. Bram hung up and stared down the hallway for a moment. His heart was beating too hard. He didn't like how helpless he felt inside his own job title. Teacher. Protector. Adult. None of those words mattered if he chose silence. He pulled up the local non-emergency line on his phone, then stopped. Non-emergency implied you had time. He didn't feel like he had time. He dialed the number the training slides had drilled into his memory, the county hotline for Child Protective Services. The line rang once, twice, and then a recorded message told him to hold. Hold. His jaw tightened. He ended the call and dialed the local police dispatch instead, still calm, still measured but clear. Merrow Creek Dispatch, the operator answered. "This is Bram Kessler," he said. "I'm a teacher at Cedar Hollow Elementary. I have a first-grade student 6 years old who reported pain when sitting and is refusing to sit. She appears frightened. I can determine why. I'm requesting an officer trained in child welfare to respond." The operator asked routine questions: name, location, whether the child was currently safe, whether there was visible injury. "No visible injury," Bram said, and hated how that sentence sounded like a dismissal. "But her behavior is concerning. She's scared." "Units will be notified," the operator said. "Stay with the child." Bram exhaled slowly and put the phone away. Then he did the hardest part. He walked back into the room and acted normal. Eloan was still standing in the calm corner, hands clenched together in front of her like she was trying to make herself smaller without moving. Bram took a seat on the tiny stool near her, angled his body sideways so he wasn't looming. He lowered his voice. "Nurse Willa is coming," he told her. "She's nice. She helps kids when they don't feel good." Eloan didn't answer. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. The lack of crying worried Bram more than crying would've. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me," he said carefully. "But if you're hurting, we want to help." "Okay." A tiny nod. So small it could have been imagined. A few minutes later, Nurse Willa Harrow slipped into the room like a shadow, her badge swinging quietly on her lanyard. She didn't announce herself. She didn't make the other kids curious. She gave Bram a look that said show me without saying a word. Bram guided Eloan toward the nurse's small office near the main hallway, keeping the walk steady, not rushing her. Eloan moved like a child walking across thin ice. In the nurse's office, Willa shut the door softly and spoke in a tone that was part lullaby, part professionalism.
Hi, sweetheart, Willa Said, crouching down. E.M. Nurse Willa. Mr.
Kessler says you're having a hard morning. Eloan's eyes stayed on her own shoes. Willa asked simple questions. Did she fall? Did she play rough? Did anything happen at recess yesterday? Did she feel sick? Eloan's answers were barely audible. Mostly shrugs.
Mostly silence.
Bram stood near the door, not crowding, but not leaving. He wasn't there to interrogate. He was there to make sure Eloan wasn't alone with her fear. Willa glanced at Bram after a moment and gave the smallest shake of her head, the kind that meant, I can't see anything obvious. I can't force a child to explain what she won't explain. Bram's stomach twisted anyway, because nothing obvious wasn't the same as nothing wrong. They returned Eloan to the classroom with the nurse's permission to stand, stretch, or use the calm corner whenever she needed. Bram told Eloan she could do morning work at the small table by the window. She stood there and traced letters without looking at anyone. At 8:34 a.m., the knock came. 2 officers stepped into the front office first, then into Bram's hallway. No sirens.
No flashing lights.
Just the quiet weight of uniforms in a school where the most serious emergency was usually a scraped elbow. One was a tall man with a patient face. The other was a woman with alert eyes and a calm, measured posture. The woman introduced herself as Officer Sloane Merritt. Bram led them to a small coordination room near the counselor's office, away from the kids. Principal Marla Quince arrived too, brisk and composed, lips pressed into the kind of smile administrators wore when they wanted problems to shrink. Officers, Marla said, smoothing the front of her blazer.
E.M. Marla Quince.
We appreciate you coming, but I'm sure this is a minor issue.
Children say all kinds of things.
Officer Merritt didn't argue. She simply turned her attention to Bram. Tell me exactly what the student said, Merritt asked. Bram didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He repeated Eloan's words as precisely as he could. She said, I can't sit. It hurts. Then she said, it hurts when I sit, and pointed down lower body. Bram said, careful with language. She refused to sit. She appeared afraid. No visible injuries. Nurse checked. The fear is what's alarming. Marla made a small sound in her throat, half disapproval, half impatience.
Mr.
Kessler, she said, voice tight, we need to be mindful of the panic these calls can create. Bram kept his eyes on Officer Merritt, because he wasn't going to argue with his principal in front of law enforcement, but he also wasn't going to retreat. Officer Merritt nodded slowly, then asked to speak with Eloan. They brought Eloan into the coordination room with the counselor present. Officer Merritt didn't stand over her. She knelt and spoke softly. Hey Eloan, she said. I'm Sloane. You're not in trouble. We're just checking in because we heard you weren't feeling good. Eloan's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her gaze darted to Bram for half a second, then back down. The officer tried again, gentle as a feather.
Can you tell me what hurts?
Eloan's shoulders rose toward her ears like she was bracing for impact. A whisper came out so small Bram almost didn't catch it.
It's better now.
Bram felt his heart drop, not because he wanted her to be in pain, but because he recognized the survival move, say the thing adults want so they'll stop asking. Children learned it fast when asking questions wasn't safe. Officer Merritt didn't push. She didn't corner Eloan with "Are you sure?" Or "Did someone do something?" She kept it simple and safe. "Okay," Merritt said. "If it hurts again, you tell Mr.
Kessler or Nurse Wille right away, Allricht."
Eloan nodded quickly. The officers stepped out with Bram and Marla. The male officer spoke first, professional and restrained. "With no visible injury and the child not disclosing abuse, we can't take immediate action today," he said. "But we can document. We can advise you on next steps." Bram's hands clenched at his sides. "She's scared," Bram said, and the words came out sharper than he intended. "That isn't normal." Officer Merritt's expression softened a fraction. "Fear matters," she said quietly, so Marla couldn't easily swat it away. "But we still need something concrete: medical findings, disclosures, observed marks.
If anything changes, call again.
Immediately." Marla exhaled like the world had returned to its proper order. "Thank you," she said, already turning her body toward the office, the conversation ending in her posture. "We'll handle it internally." Bram didn't move. He watched the officers walk away through the hallway, their footsteps fading into the school's normal noise. Then he looked back at the door to his classroom where laughter and pencils and ordinary life continued, as if a 6-year-old hadn't just quietly waved a red flag that no one wanted to see. He returned to room 12 and forced a smile for the kids, because that's what teachers do. He guided a reading circle. He helped a boy sound out turtle. He praised a girl for remembering a punctuation mark. All while his mind replayed Eloan's voice, flat, frightened, too careful. At lunch, Principal Quince caught him near the copy machine. "Bram," she said, using his first name in that sharp administrative way, "I need you to understand something. Calling police without proof can damage reputations. It can scare parents. It can cause the kind of headlines we don't want." Bram stared at the stack of copied worksheets in his hands, the ink still warm. "And if I don't call," he said, voice steady, "and something happens to her, what headline do we get then?" Marla's eyes hardened. "Be careful," she said, and walked away. That night, Bram lay in bed staring at his ceiling fan as it chopped the darkness into slow rotations. He'd taught long enough to know that kids didn't always have the vocabulary for what was happening to them. Sometimes they had only symptoms and silence. Sometimes they had only a sentence, delivered like a confession, and then withdrawn out of fear. He kept seeing Eloan's posture, standing behind her chair, like sitting down was stepping into danger. He kept hearing that whisper, "It's better now." Not relief. A retreat. By morning, Bram's decision was already made. Even if the system moved slowly. Even if the adults around him preferred comfort over confrontation. Even if he had to document every tiny change like it was a breadcrumb trail through a forest. He would not let Eloan disappear into probably nothing. Because sometimes, in a classroom full of noise, the quietest child was the one screaming the loudest. Monday doesn't bring relief at Cedar Hollow, it brings patterns. Bram Kessler arrived early enough that the parking lot was still half dark and the custodian was the only other soul awake in the building. The air inside smelled like pencil shavings and floor wax, that clean but tired scent schools get when they've been scrubbed for years and still hold every kid's worry in the grout. Bram unlocked room 12, flipped on the lights, and stood there for a second, staring at the tiny chairs like they were suspects. He hated that thought. He hated that a chair could become a symbol in his mind, something ordinary turning ominous just because of one sentence from a child with trembling hands. He'd spent most of Sunday trying to talk himself down with rational explanations. Muscle strain, constipation, a bruise from playground equipment, a fall she was embarrassed about. The kind of mundane stuff teachers saw 100 times a year. But every time he tried to file it away as probably nothing, he saw Eloan's posture again, how she'd stayed behind her chair, like sitting down might trigger something worse than pain. He opened his laptop and typed a few notes into the incident log he kept for his own sanity: date, time, exact wording, who was present. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't guess. He wrote facts the way mandated reporter training drilled into him: what you observe, what you hear, what you do. Then he set the room up to look as normal as possible, because kids could smell adult anxiety the way dogs smelled thunderstorms. He taped up a new morning message. He straightened the reading rug. He laid out the morning tubs, with extra care crayons, pattern blocks, picture cards like tidy objects could force the world to behave. When the first students arrived, Bram stood at the door and greeted each of them with the same steady voice.
Morning, Tatum. Hey, Kel, nice dinosaur shirt.
Hi, Maris. I like your braids. He watched for Eloan without looking like he was watching.
Eloan came in last.
Same backpack still on. Same tight straps.
Same eyes down.
Same careful steps like the hallway was slippery. She went to her desk, stopped behind her chair, and didn't move. Bram's chest tightened quietly, professionally, invisibly. He didn't rush over like an alarm bell. He walked toward her the way you approach a startled animal, slow, calm, giving space. Good morning, Eloan, he said. You can do morning tubs wherever feels best today. Eloan didn't answer, but her fingers flexed around the strap like she was holding herself together.
Do you want the standing spot by the window again?
Bram asked. A small nod. Bram slid her clipboard from the supply shelf, the sturdy kind they used for stations, so kids could write anywhere. He also pulled a soft foam mat from the calm corner, something to stand on so her feet wouldn't ache. He set them down without making a big deal out of it. Here you go.
If you need anything, you wave me over.
Eloan's shoulders lowered just a fraction, as if permission itself had weight. For a while, the morning ran like it always did: small voices, little arguments, pencil taps, the squeak of a marker cap that never fit right. Bram guided a phonics warm-up and coached a handful of kids through a worksheet that involved circling pictures that started with BR. He laughed when Kellen proudly announced that broccoli is basically a tiny tree, and he helped Maris find her missing eraser under a desk. But his awareness stayed split, like he had one eye on the lesson and one eye on Eloan's body language. Eloan didn't fidget the way most kids did. She didn't wander. She didn't whisper. She stayed still, standing with her feet tucked close, shoulders slightly hunched. Every time she shifted her weight, her face pinched for a heartbeat so fast he wouldn't have caught it if he wasn't looking for it. At 9:18, Bram saw her glance at the chair again. Not casual.
Not like a kid checking for crumbs. Like checking a trap.
He decided to change the energy before the room could harden around that chair. Okay, artists, he announced with a brightness he didn't fully feel. We're doing something different for our writing block. The kids cheered. Anything that wasn't handwriting practice was basically a holiday. He handed out blank paper and put cups of crayons and colored pencils on the tables. He wrote a prompt on the board. Draw a place you know really well. A place that feels familiar. It was meant to be simple and open, direct questions, no pressure. Just a chance for kids to show what they carried in their heads. Most of the class immediately went to predictable places: grandma's kitchen, a backyard trampoline, a bedroom with stuffed animals, a favorite park. Bram floated around the room, offering encouragement the way teachers do. I love the colors you chose. Tell me about that dog. Wow, that slide is huge. Eloan stayed standing at the window station, head bent low, drawing with intense focus. She didn't look up once. Her grip on the pencil was unusually tight for a first grader, knuckles pale, as if loosening her hand might let something escape. Bram didn't hover. He didn't want her to feel watched. He moved from table to table like normal, but he kept a mental note. Eloan's paper stayed face down between strokes, like she kept covering it instinctively, then flipping it back, then drawing more. When the timer chimed, soft little bells from Bram's phone, kids started turning their papers over to show each other.
Mine has a pool. I drew my dad's truck.
I made a unicorn in my room because it's my room, so I can. Eloan didn't show anyone. She slid her paper under her clipboard and held the clipboard flat against her stomach, still standing.
Bram knelt at her side.
Not in front. Not blocking her. Just beside. Want to tell me about yours? He asked. Eloan hesitated, like she was about to say no, then she lifted one corner of the paper just enough for him to see. At first Bram's brain tried to interpret it as something innocent, a rectangle, a simple shape, maybe furniture. But the longer he looked, the more his stomach sank. It was a chair. Not a cute cartoon chair. Not the kind of chair kids drew in Happy Kitchens.
A single chair in the middle of a blank page.
Around it were scattered dark red crayon dots, messy, uneven, splattered looking. Not detailed. Not graphic. But placed in a way that made Bram's mind go cold anyway, because kids didn't accidentally put marks like that around an object and then hide the page like a secret. And in the corner, scribbled small, were 3 shaky lines that looked like words a first grader struggled to shape. Bram leaned in closer, careful not to touch the paper without permission. The letters weren't perfect, but he could make them out. No sit. Hurt. Bram felt his breath catch. He didn't say blood. He didn't say, what is that? He didn't say anything that would plant images in her head or lead her into an answer. He just nodded slowly, letting his face stay gentle. Thank you for showing me, he said. You did a really brave thing. Eloan's eyes flicked to his, then away. She looked like she was waiting for him to get angry.
Waiting for the punishment.
Bram swallowed. You're safe with me in here, he said quietly. I'm going to keep your drawing in a safe place, okay? Eloan nodded once, tight and quick. Bram slid the drawing into a plain manila folder, the kind that held attendance sheet so it wouldn't be seen by curious classmates. He didn't make her carry it. He didn't ask her to explain it. He simply gave her a new sheet of paper and said, if you want to draw more later, you can. Or you can just do the normal worksheet. Your choice.
Choice mattered.
Choice was a kind of medicine.
Eloan chose a worksheet. Still standing.
When the kids went to lunch, Bram didn't eat. He walked straight to the student support office, past the trophy case, past the bulletin board of smiling honor roll photos, into a small space that always smelled like herbal tea and printer ink.
Dr.
Tamsin Rowe, the school counselor, was sitting at her desk with a laptop open and a mug that said "Stay Grounded" in chipped lettering. Tamsin was in her 30s, hair usually pulled into a messy bun, eyes sharp in the calm way a storm chaser might be calm. She didn't waste words when something mattered. Bram shut the door behind him and placed the folder on her desk without sitting down. I need you to see something, he said. Tamsin's expression changed immediately, not alarmed, but focused. She opened the folder and studied the drawing in silence for a long moment. Then she looked up at Bram. Tell me exactly what happened, she said. Bram repeated the timeline the same way he'd told the officer. The words Eloan used, her refusal to sit, the fear, the withdrawal of her statement when police arrived, and now this drawing with the text. Tamsin didn't interrupt. She took notes in a neat, fast script. When Bram finished, she leaned back slightly. This is not a normal OE drawing, she said carefully. It doesn't prove anything by itself, but it adds weight to what you observed. Especially because she's hiding it. Bram rubbed his palm against his thigh, trying to shake out the adrenaline. The principal thinks I overreacted, he said. Tamsin's mouth tightened. Marla cares about the school's image, she said. You care about the child. Bram didn't answer, because that was exactly it. Tamsin tapped the drawing lightly, not as evidence in a courtroom but as a message in a bottle. "We need to do this the right way," she said. "No leading questions. No, did someone touch you stuff. That can ruin an investigation and confuse a child." "I know," Bram said. "I'm not trying to play detective. I don't want her to get swallowed by the system." Tamsin nodded once. "Then we build a clear record," she said. "We document. We support. We watch for changes. We keep the environment safe enough that she can speak when she's ready."
Bram felt the edge of frustration rise.
"But what if she never gets ready?" he asked. Tamsin's tone softened. "Sometimes kids speak with behavior before they speak with words," she said. "Her body is already talking. We just need to make sure someone is listening and that the right agencies hear it, too." She opened a drawer and pulled out a standardized form, student concern log. Dates. Times.
Observations. Direct quotes.
Witnesses.
Actions taken.
"Start this today," she said, sliding it to Bram. "And I'll open a parallel file from my side.
2 records.
Same facts. That matters." Bram nodded, then hesitated. "Should we call her mom?" he asked. Tamsin considered it. "We can," she said. "But carefully. If there's abuse happening at home, calling can escalate risk. We have to weigh it." Bram thought of Eloan's face when the officers spoke to her the way she'd retreated into better now like a turtle into its shell. "I don't want to make it worse," he admitted. Tamsin nodded. "We'll follow protocol," she said. "I'll consult with the district social worker. We can also request a medical evaluation through the proper channels if symptoms persist. Meanwhile, you keep doing what you're already doing, making her feel safe." Bram stared at the drawing again. The chair in the middle of the page looked so small, so powerless, and yet it held the gravity of a storm. Tamsin reached for a sticky notepad and wrote something in block letters. She tore it off and stuck it lightly to the top corner of a blank sheet of paper. "If something is hard to say, you can draw it." Then she slid the paper toward Bram. "Offer this to her," Tamsin said. "No speech. No pressure. Just an option."
Bram exhaled slowly.
The simplicity of it almost hurt. When he returned to room 12 after lunch, the kids were still buzzing from cafeteria sugar and playground windburn. Bram clapped his hands and corralled them into reading groups, guiding them through a story about a lost fox in winter. Eloan stood at her window station, silent, eyes fixed on the page like she was trying to disappear into the paper. During independent work time, Bram walked over and placed the new sheet gently on her clipboard, like he was leaving a menu at a restaurant. Eloan's eyes darted to the corner message.
She read it slowly, lips barely moving.
Then she looked at Bram. Not long. Not trusting. But longer than she had before. And in that tiny pause between fear and the possibility of being believed, Bram felt something shift, like a lock turning one notch. Eloan didn't draw right away. She just held the pencil and stared at the blank page as if she was deciding whether blankness was safer than truth. Bram didn't wait for an immediate miracle. He didn't need a confession in one afternoon. He just needed her to know that she had a door, and it wasn't locked. At dismissal, when Bram watched kids spill out to parents and older siblings, Eloan lingered by her desk again. She didn't run. She didn't chatter. She simply stood with that same careful posture. Bram kept his face neutral while his mind catalogued every detail. When a tall man in paint-stained jeans appeared near the pickup line, arms crossed, jaw set, Eloan's entire body tightened like a drawn wire. Bram didn't know the man's name yet. But he recognized the effect. Eloan's eyes dropped. Her shoulders curled inward. She stepped toward the exit with the resigned obedience of someone who had learned resistance costs more than it's worth. Bram's throat went dry. He didn't confront anyone in front of the child. He didn't escalate in the parking lot. He simply watched, held the moment in his memory like a snapshot, and wrote it down the second he got back inside. That night, Bram sat at his kitchen table with the concern log beside a cold cup of coffee and the manila folder closed in front of him. The drawing inside felt like it was humming through the paper. He knew the principal would want this to go away. He knew the first police response hadn't gone anywhere. He knew proof was a cruel word when the victim was 6 and scared. But he also knew something else, something steadier than fear. Eloan had shown him the chair. She had written NOSIT. Hurt. That wasn't nothing. That was a child trying to speak the only way she could. And Bram decided, right there in the quiet of his apartment, that he would keep listening patiently, persistently until her silence stopped being the loudest thing in the room. Friday afternoon turned the school gate into a thin line between two worlds. Inside Cedar Hollow, everything was bright on purpose paper snowflakes taped to windows, posters with smiling cartoon owls reminding kids to use kind words, hallway art projects that looked like little bursts of safety. Outside the fence, the world went back to being the world. Engines idling, tired parents checking phones, siblings squabbling, the distant hiss of traffic on Route 9 like a long exhale. Bram Kessler stood near the dismissal line with his clipboard, doing what teachers always did at pickup, matching faces to names, scanning for the right adult, waving small bodies forward, keeping the chaos from swallowing someone. He kept his expression calm, because kids learned from your face whether they should feel calm too. But his eyes kept drifting, not obsessively, not like a man hunting a problem or like a smoke detector that wouldn't stop sensing heat.
Eloven.
All week she'd been a quiet thundercloud in the corner of his mind. Standing more than sitting.
Flinching when the classroom got too loud.
Turning her body sideways as if trying to shrink. Watching the door the way kids watch doors when the door was the thing that decided whether they were safe. Bram had done everything by the book so far, documented exact quotes, notified the nurse, involved the counselor, called in the first welfare response. Still, the not enough evidence phrase sat on him like wet clothing. It wasn't that he didn't understand procedure, he did. It was that procedure always seemed to ask for a child to be hurt in ways adults could measure before adults would move. At 3:11 p.m., Eloan appeared in the line with her class, backpack on, hands clasped tight in front of her belly. She didn't chatter like the other kids. She didn't bounce. Her eyes stayed down, and her mouth stayed neutral like she'd practiced not showing anything. Bram stepped closer, just within her peripheral vision. "You did good work today," he said softly, so only she could hear.
Eloven blinked once.
A tiny acknowledgement. Not quite a smile, more like proof she'd heard him and didn't expect punishment for it.
Then the pickup monitor called, "Eloan Grant."
Eloan's shoulders jumped as if the name itself had teeth. Bram followed her gaze through the chain-link fence. A man leaned on the gate like he owned the air around it. He wasn't dressed like most guardians at pickup, no coffee cup, no office badge, no parent-on-the-go uniform of athleisure. He wore paint-stained jeans and a faded work shirt with a ripped pocket. His arms were crossed, forearms thick, jaw tight. He didn't scan the crowd with worry like people who were searching for a child. He stared straight ahead, impatient, like the whole school was slowing down his life. Eloan went still.
Not kiet still. Not im schei still.
The kind of stillness you saw in animals when they heard a predator. Bram's stomach turned over, slow and heavy. He didn't know the man's name yet. But he recognized the effect. The fear came first, then the obedience.
Eloan walked toward the gate without looking up.
Her steps were small and careful, like she'd been taught to take up as little space as possible. The man shifted his weight. The moment Eloan was close enough, he reached out not to take her hand gently, not to brush hair from her face but to grip her backpack strap and tug. "Come on," he muttered, loud enough for Bram to hear. "You move like molasses." Eloan's head dipped lower. Bram felt the heat rise behind his eyes. He kept his voice steady anyway. "Hi," Bram said, stepping forward just enough to be present. "I'm Mr.
Kessler-Eloven S. teacher."
The man's gaze flicked to Bram with open irritation. "And?" Bram held the smile that wasn't a smile, just a calm mask. "We've noticed Eloan hasn't been comfortable sitting in class. She's mentioned pain. I wanted to make sure she's okay and see if you've noticed anything at home." The man snorted. Not amused.
Dismissive.
"Kids say dumb stuff," he said. "They're kids." Bram kept his tone mild.
"It might be nothing.
"But we take any complaint seriously.
Sometimes a quick checkup."
The man cut him off with a sharp laugh that had no warmth in it. "You gonna teach or you gonna play doctor?" he said.
"Stay in your lane."
Bram didn't flinch. He didn't step back either. "I'm in my lane," Bram said.
"My lane is keeping my students safe."
The man's eyes narrowed, and Bram saw something there he didn't like, something that enjoyed pushing a little too close to the edge. "Name's Dax," the man said, like the introduction was a warning.
Dax Rourke.
"Not her dad. Her stepdad. And you don't need to worry about what happens in my house." He yanked the backpack strap again. Eloan stumbled half a step forward to keep from falling. Bram's fingers curled around his clipboard. He forced them to relax.
"All recht," Bram said evenly.
"If she says she's in pain again, we'll notify the nurse. Have a good weekend." Dax didn't answer. He turned, already done with the conversation, and walked away. Eloan followed like she'd been pulled by an invisible string. Bram watched them go until they reached the parking lot and disappeared behind a minivan with a cracked taillight. Then he wrote it down as soon as he got inside. Not his feelings. Not his guesses. Just facts. Adult male guardian at pickup.
Identified self as stepfather. Dax Rourke.
Child exhibited visible tension at sight of guardian, froze, lowered gaze, reduced movement.
Guardian used impatient tone, tugged backpack strap.
Guardian dismissed concern, responded with hostility when asked about child's pain. He stared at the page afterward, his pen hovering, because the urge to write more what he thought it meant was strong. He didn't. Facts were how systems moved. Feelings were how kids got ignored. That evening, Bram sat at his kitchen counter with the counselor's concern log beside his laptop and a dinner he wasn't eating. The window above the sink reflected his face back at him, tired and too alert, like someone who'd been listening for a sound in the dark. He had Eloan's emergency contact file open on the screen.
Mother, Reese Grant. Stepvater, Dax Rourke.
Secondary contact, blank. Sibling listed, Jude Grant, age 10. Bram didn't want to call. Calls could make things worse. Calls could warn the wrong person that eyes were on them. But he also couldn't accept silence as the plan. He dialed Reese. It rang long enough that Bram started to think she wouldn't answer. Then, "Hello." A woman's voice, strained at the edges, like she was holding the phone away from her ear. "Hi, MS. Grant," Bram said.
"This is Bram Kessler-Eloven S. teacher at Cedar Hollow."
A pause. Then, "Is she in trouble?" "No," Bram said quickly. "Not at all. I just wanted to check in. Eloan's been reporting discomfort sitting in class. She seems anxious. I'm not trying to alarm you, just trying to support her." Reese exhaled, and Bram heard something in that breath that wasn't relief. It was calculation. She's sensitive, Reese said. She always has been. She complains when she's nervous. Bram kept his voice gentle. That could be. But the pain complaint has been consistent. And today she looked frightened at pickup.
Another pause.
Frightened. Reese repeated, like the word itself irritated her.
She is dramatic.
She gets ideas. It's a new school. New teacher. She's still adjusting. Bram chose his next sentence carefully, like he was placing something fragile on a table. I understand transitions can be hard, he said. But I also want to make sure Eloan feels safe. Sometimes when kids don't have the words, they show it through behavior. Reese's voice sharpened. Are you saying she's not safe at home? Bram didn't take the bait. I'm saying I'm concerned about her well-being, he replied. It's my responsibility to check in. A long silence stretched on the line, the kind where Bram could imagine Reese looking around the room before speaking again. Dax is strict, she said finally, quieter. He believes in discipline. But he's not a monster. Bram felt the hairs rise on his arms. He hated that his brain latched onto that word monster because he hadn't used it. He kept his voice neutral. I'm not labeling anyone, Bram said. I'm just asking for cooperation so we can help Eloan. Would you be willing to have her seen by a pediatrician? Reese's answer came too fast. We'll handle it.
Okay, Bram said softly.
If you do, please update the school nurse. And if Eloan is in pain, she has permission to stand in class. I don't want her forced into discomfort.
Another pause.
Bram heard something faint in the background, a door closing, maybe, or a step on hard flooring. Reese's voice lowered further.
Mr.
Kessler, please don't make this a big thing, she said, and there was a tremor there that didn't sound like anger. It sounded like fear. Bram swallowed. I don't want to make it a big thing, he said. I want to make it a safe thing. The line went quiet again. Then Reese said, thank you, but it didn't sound like gratitude. It sounded like an ending.
The call disconnected.
Bram stared at his phone for a moment, feeling like he'd been speaking to someone through a thick wall. He wrote the call summary in his log immediately, time, date, exact phrases. He didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was trying to be a hero, not because he thought he alone could save anyone. It was because his brain kept replaying the same images, Eloan's body tightening at the gate, Dax's hand tugging her strap like she was luggage, Reese's voice saying please don't make this a big thing. Saturday morning arrived gray and raw, the kind of cold Ohio day where the sky looked like it hadn't decided whether it wanted to snow or just sulk. Bram drank coffee that tasted like nothing and sat at his table with the student file open beside Tamsin Rowe's notes from the week. He knew the professional boundaries. He knew he couldn't investigate. He knew he couldn't storm into someone's home demanding answers. But he also knew something else. Schools didn't just teach math and reading anymore. They were often the only place where children could be seen by safe adults consistently. A home visit wasn't unheard of in his district, especially framed as family outreach, especially for new students adjusting to the school. He called Tamsin before he talked himself out of it. Tamsin answered on the second ring, voice calm. You're up early, she said. I can't shake it, Bram admitted.
Pick up yesterday the stepdad.
The child's reaction. And the mom's call, she was evasive. Tamsin didn't ask a dozen questions. She simply said, what are you thinking? I'm thinking of doing a quick outreach visit, Bram said.
Daytime.
Public. Just to introduce myself, offer resources, check if they need help with transportation or a pediatric referral.
No accusations. No interrogation.
Tamsin paused. Bram could almost hear her weighing risk. If you do it, she said, Do it safely.
Don, T go inside. Keep it brief. And document everything. If anything feels off, leave. I will, Bram promised. Tamsin sighed.
I don't love that you have to do this, she said. But I understand why.
Text me before and after.
And Bram, trust your instincts, but keep your actions clean. Clean. Clear.
Defensible.
Bram printed a generic family support resources sheet, food pantry numbers, free clinic hours, counseling hotlines, after-school program contact info. He put it in a folder with his school ID visible, because he didn't want to look like a stranger. Then he drove. The address on file led him to the edge of Merrow Creek, where the neighborhoods thinned out and the sidewalks disappeared. Small houses sat close together like they were trying to stay warm by proximity. Some had kids' bikes in the yard and chalk drawings on the driveway. Others had only bare steps and curtains pulled tight. Eloan's house was one of the tight-curtain ones. A narrow, tired-looking place with peeling paint on the trim and a chain-link fence that leaned like it was exhausted. The yard had no toys, no bright plastic, no signs of a child's presence beyond a worn patch of grass by the steps. A window was covered by a sheet instead of blinds. Bram parked on the street, took a breath, and walked up the path with his folder held low and visibly threatening. He knocked twice. No answer. He waited, listening. A dog barked 2 houses down. A car passed. The air smelled faintly like damp leaves and something metallic.
He knocked again, softer.
After a moment, the door opened just enough for a thin face to appear.
A boy.
About 10. Hair messy. T-shirt too big like it had been handed down from someone older. His eyes were wary in a way that made Bram's chest tighten. Kids were supposed to be wary of strangers, but this was different. This was wary of consequences. Hi, Bram said, keeping his tone warm and low. I'm Mr.
Kessler. I teach Eloan at Cedar Hollow.
The boy's eyes flickered, then darted behind him into the house as if checking whether someone else was listening. Eloan's not here, he said quickly. Bram nodded. Okay.
ZS all right.
Are you Jude?
The boy hesitated before nodding once.
Bram kept his posture relaxed. He didn't step closer. Nice to meet you, Jude. I just wanted to drop off some school information and check if your mom had any questions. Is Reese home? Jude's mouth tightened.
She is sleeping.
It was nearly 11 in the morning. Bram's gaze slipped past the crack in the door. The house interior was dim despite daylight. The living room looked half-packed, half-neglected, like people lived there but didn't settle there.
A couch sagged, stained in places.
A stack of unopened mail sat on a small table beside an empty soda bottle. The air smelled stale, like old food and old stress.
No kids' books.
No bright drawings on the fridge. No little signs that said, "A child is cherished here." Bram felt anger flash in him. He smothered it quickly. Anger wasn't useful yet. Do you go to Cedar Hollow too? Bram asked gently.
Jude shrugged.
I used to.
What do you mean, used to?
Bram asked, keeping his voice casual. Jude's eyes dropped. I stay here. Watch stuff. Dax says somebody has to. Bram's heart thudded. Who's Dax? He asked, though he already knew.
Jude's voice got quieter.
My mom's husband. Bram nodded slowly, as if this was normal conversation about pets or video games. Jude, he said, I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just need to understand what Eloan needs to be okay at school. Jude swallowed and glanced back into the house again. His hands twisted the hem of his shirt. When Eloan cries, Bram asked softly, what happens? Jude's jaw clenched. For a second it looked like he wouldn't answer at all. Then he said, almost like he was reciting a rule, "Dax doesn't like crying." Bram kept his tone steady. "What does he do when he doesn't like it?" Jude's voice dropped to a whisper. "He yells. Sometimes he uses his belt." Bram felt something inside him go cold and sharp at the same time. He didn't ask for details. He didn't ask where or how. He didn't ask anything that would force Jude to picture it. He simply nodded, slow and serious, so Jude would know he'd been heard. "That's not okay," Bram said quietly.
"No adult should hurt a kid.
Ever." Jude's eyes shone for a second, and Bram realized the boy wasn't just scared, he was carrying the weight of believing he had to keep the family together by staying silent. Jude swallowed hard. "If my mom talks," he whispered, "Dax says he'll leave. And then we'll have nothing." Bram understood in a flash. Fear wasn't always fear of being hit. Sometimes it was fear of losing rent, losing food, losing stability, even a bad stability, because adults had taught the kids that silence was the price of survival. Bram took a slow breath. He slipped the resource sheet from his folder and held it out, not pushing it through the doorway, not forcing Jude to take it. "This has numbers for help," Bram said. "Free clinic. Support services. If you ever need to talk to a safe adult, the school can help.
You're not alone."
Jude stared at the paper like it was something dangerous and hopeful at the same time. Bram reached into his pocket, pulled out a sticky note, and wrote his school extension. He held it out with the resource sheet. "If you can't call, you can tell Eloan to give a note to me," Bram said. "Or you can talk to Nurse Willa. Or Dr. Rowe. Any of us." Jude took the papers with trembling fingers and tucked them against his chest like he was hiding contraband. Bram nodded once. "I won't stay long," he said. "I just wanted you to know you have people." Jude whispered, "Okay," but his voice sounded like someone trying to believe in something he'd never seen work before. Bram backed away from the porch, slow and calm, and walked to his car without looking over his shoulder too many times. Only when he was inside, door shut, did he let himself exhale. His hands shook on the steering wheel. He didn't sit there spiraling. He didn't sit there imagining worst-case scenes until he couldn't breathe. He did the next correct thing. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Tamsin, went to address. Spoke with sibling Jude. Shared resources. Concern escalated.
Call me.
Then he drove home and wrote down every detail while it was fresh. Not because he wanted a story. Because he wanted a record. Because now the fear had a name, Dax Rourke, and it had a pattern, and it had a witness who was a child trying to hold a crumbling world together with silence. And Bram knew, with a steady certainty that made his stomach ache, that Eloan's chair drawing wasn't just a drawing. It was a warning. And he was done pretending warnings were optional. By Monday morning, Bram Kessler didn't feel like a teacher walking into a building. He felt like a man carrying a fragile truth in a folder that wasn't thick enough to protect a child. The weekend had left grit under his skin. Jude's wary eyes at the cracked front door, the dim living room that didn't look like it had ever been allowed to be joyful, the way the boy had whispered belt like it was a weather forecast instead of violence. Bram had done what he could without crossing lines. He hadn't stepped inside, hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't tried to catch something. He had left resources. He had listened. He had walked away. But listening alone wasn't a rescue. Listening had to turn into action that the system recognized as action. He arrived at Cedar Hollow before sunrise again, the parking lot lit by one buzzing lamp that made the frost on the windshields look like powdered sugar. Inside the school, the halls were empty and echoing, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Bram unlocked room 12 and placed his bag down, then immediately pulled out the folder he'd kept on his kitchen table all weekend. Incident log. Exact quotes. Timeline. The drawing, the chair, the scattered red blotches, the shaky words.
Pickup behavior.
The phone call with Reese Grant. And now, the most recent piece, Jude's disclosure. He didn't add adjectives. He didn't add emotion. He wrote it like a police report even though he wasn't police, because he'd learned the hard way that paperwork was the language adults trusted more than instinct. At 7:12 a.m., he knocked on the counselor's office door.
Doctor.
Tamsin Rowe was already there, hair still damp like she'd showered fast, cardigan pulled tight against the early chill. She took one look at Bram's face and didn't bother with small talk. "You went," she said. Bram nodded. "I did." And her voice stayed calm, but her eyes sharpened. Bram stepped inside, shut the door, and placed his folder on her desk. "I spoke to Jude," he said quietly. "He said Dax yells. He said sometimes he uses a belt." Tamsin's jaw tightened in a way Bram rarely saw. Controlled anger, the kind professionals carried privately so they could do their jobs. "Did you write down the exact phrasing?" she asked. "I did it the moment I got home," Bram said. "Date, time, context, everything." Tamsin nodded once, then exhaled through her nose. "Okay," she said. "Then we report again. Today. Immediately.
New information, new report."
Bram's stomach clenched, because part of him still braced for the same answer, not enough. Wait.
Monitor.
Document. The bureaucracy that asked children to bleed in visible ways before it believed them. But he kept his voice steady. "I already called once," he said. "Police came. Nothing they could do without marks or disclosure." Tamsin lifted her eyes to his. "This isn't about the first call," she said. "This is about the next call. And the next. We do not stop documenting because someone else moved slowly." The words hit Bram like a hand on his shoulder, firm, grounding. Tamsin pulled the district's mandated reporter protocol binder from her shelf, flipped it open with practice speed, and set it between them. She pointed to the section that mattered.
"Second-hand disclosure counts," she said. "Sibling disclosure counts.
Behavioral indicators plus a child statement plus a witness statement. This is enough to request screening. It may not be enough for removal today, but it is enough to keep the file alive and raise priority." Bram swallowed. "Then let's do it." Tamsin picked up the phone, dialed the county hotline, and turned on speaker so Bram could confirm facts. A recorded voice walked them through the hold message, the kind that always sounded too calm for what it handled. Then a human voice answered, flat, professional, tired. "Child Protective Services intake. What are you reporting today?" Tamsin's posture shifted into that careful cadence counselors learned, clear, factual, minimal interpretation. "I'm Dr. Tamsin Rowe, school counselor at Cedar Hollow Elementary," she said. "I'm calling as a mandated reporter. We have ongoing concerns about a first-grade student, Eloan Grant, age 6. New information has been disclosed by an older sibling during a weekend outreach visit by her teacher, Mr. Bram Kessler, also a mandated reporter." The intake worker asked for names, address, guardians, and risk factors. Bram answered what he knew, sticking to facts like stepping stones. Eloan's statement: pain when sitting.
Persistent refusal to sit.
The drawing depicting a chair surrounded by red marks with written words indicating pain and avoidance. Fear response at pickup when stepfather arrived.
Stepfather identified as Dax Rourke.
Mother identified as Reese Grant. Phone call indicated minimizing and a request not to make it a big thing. Sibling Jude, age 10, stated stepfather uses a belt and yells when Eloan cries. The intake worker's questions were clinical and relentless. Any visible injuries observed at school? No, Bram said, and hated saying it again. Any direct disclosure from the child that an adult caused the injury? Not yet, Tamsin said. Any prior CPS history known? Not in our records, Bram replied. Any current medical reports? None available, Tamsin said. We've encouraged an evaluation. There was a pause on the line, the kind where you could feel the worker deciding whether a child's fear was urgent in the official sense. Finally, we'll screen it. An investigator may be assigned depending on priority. Continue to document and call if anything escalates. Bram's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Tamsin's tone stayed polite but firm. We will, she said. And I need to note that the child is consistently refusing to sit due to pain and exhibiting fear responses. Noted, the intake worker replied, a word that felt both necessary and painfully small. When the call ended, Bram stared at the silent phone as if it might suddenly say something honest like, "We're coming right now." Tamsin slid a form toward him. "Write your statement the way you did your log," she said. "Exact language. No assumptions. We keep this clean." Bram nodded and began writing. Halfway through, the counselor's office door opened without a knock. Principal Marla Quince stepped in, crisp blazer, coffee in hand, a look on her face like she already disliked what she was about to hear. "I was told you're making another report," she said. Tamsin didn't flinch. "We are," she replied. "We have new information." Marla's gaze cut to Bram. "Mr. Kessler," she said, tone tight with managerial irritation, "you're not a social worker. You're not law enforcement. We cannot have staff conducting unofficial investigations." Bram kept his voice calm, but he didn't soften it. "It wasn't an investigation," he said. "It was a welfare outreach visit, daylight, no entry into the home, no confrontation. I documented exactly what was said and reported it." Marla's lips pressed into a line. "This creates risk," she said. "For the school. For you." Tamsin set her coffee down gently, like she was placing it far away from a fire hazard. "The greater risk," she said evenly, "is ignoring a child's indicators and failing our mandated reporter obligations."
Marla's eyes narrowed.
"You have no proof," she said. Bram felt something steady lock into place inside him. "Mandated reporting doesn't require proof," he said. "It requires reasonable suspicion."
The words hung in the office like a door slamming shut.
Marla looked between them, then forced a thin smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Fine," she said. "But you keep me informed.
And keep your notes professional."
Bram nodded once. "They are." Marla left, heels clicking down the hall, and the counselor's office felt warmer the moment she was gone, not because the temperature changed, but because pressure shifted. Tamsin leaned back and rubbed her forehead. "She'll push," she murmured. "But she can't stop you from reporting. Just be prepared for her to act like the problem is the reporting, not the harm." Bram's pen paused above the paper. "What if CPS doesn't move again?" he asked quietly. Tamsin's eyes met his. "Then we become the net," she said. "We make school the safest place she knows.
We keep the record alive.
And we don't miss the moment when evidence becomes visible." It wasn't heroic. It wasn't a movie speech. It was the truth of how these cases often worked, slow, measured, painfully dependent on timing. At 8:06, students began arriving. Bram and Tamsin stepped back into their roles like actors changing costumes. Teacher face, counselor face steady, normal, warm. The system might move slowly, but kids still needed a classroom that didn't feel like a courtroom.
Eloan entered last again.
Backpack on. Eyes down. Standing behind her chair. Bram didn't greet her with worry. He greeted her with routine. "Morning, Eloan," he said, and pointed to the standing station by the window.
"Your spot is ready."
Eloan gave the smallest nod and moved to the window, careful with her steps. She stood on the foam mat Bram had set out, clipboard waiting, pencil already sharpened.
Routine mattered.
Predictability was safety. During morning work, Bram kept his teaching voice bright. He guided kids through letter blends, praised neat handwriting, redirected a whispered argument about whose eraser was better. Every few minutes he glanced at Eloan, not enough to make her feel watched, but enough to make sure she wasn't disappearing. At 9:40, Bram slipped a small laminated feelings chart onto Eloan's clipboard, faces ranging from calm to sad to scared to angry. No words required, just pointing. He didn't make a speech. He didn't crouch and ask questions. He simply tapped it once and said softly, "If you ever want to tell me how your body feels or how your heart feels, you can point."
No talking needed.
Eloan stared at the chart for a long moment. Then, with a movement so small Bram almost missed it, she slid her finger to the face labeled scared and held it there for 2 seconds before pulling her hand back like she'd touched something hot. Bram's chest tightened, but he kept his voice gentle and normal.
"Thank you," he said. "That helps me."
He moved away immediately, because staying too close would turn it into pressure. At recess, Bram stood on yard duty, scanning the playground the way teachers did, watching for falls, conflicts, a kid crying alone by the fence. Eloan didn't run like most of the kids. She stayed near the building wall, drawing circles in the gravel with the toe of her shoe, quiet and separate. Tamsin came out too, pretending to check on the playground roster while her eyes tracked Eloan's body language. "Still isolating," Tamsin murmured when she reached Bram. Bram nodded, gaze forward. "She's watching adults more than kids," he whispered.
"Tats Hypervigilance," Tamsin said softly.
"It's not proof, but it's data." Data. That was how you fought numb bureaucracy, one accurate detail at a time. After recess, Tamsin asked Bram to bring Eloan to the counselor's office for a check-in. The phrasing was intentionally harmless. Lots of kids had check-ins. Lots of kids had feelings charts. It was normal enough not to set off alarms. In the counselor's office, the lights were warmer than the classroom fluorescents. A small lamp glowed beside a basket of fidget toys. A plant sat on the windowsill like an attempt at peace. Eloan stood by the door at first, backpack still on, eyes flicking to the chair and away. Tamsin didn't tell her to sit. She simply said, "Hi, Eloan.
"You can stand if you want.
Or you can sit on the floor rug.
Whatever your body likes best."
Eloan's shoulders lowered slightly, and she stepped toward the rug. Tamsin set out paper and colored pencils.
"Mr.
Kessler told me you're a strong artist," she said. "Sometimes when kids have big feelings, drawing helps the feelings come out without words." Eloan picked up a pencil but didn't draw yet. She held it like a key she wasn't sure she was allowed to use. Bram sat on the small stool near the wall, angled away so he wouldn't loom, hands resting on his knees. He didn't speak. He didn't push. He simply stayed. Tamsin slid the same message Bram had given her before onto the table, printed neatly. "If something is hard to say, you can draw it." Eloan stared at it. Her throat moved as she swallowed. Minutes passed in silence, thick, cautious, full of everything unsaid. Finally, Eloan began to draw. Not a chair this time. A small stick figure. Then another. Then a bigger figure that loomed over them, drawn with heavier lines. The bigger figure's mouth was a jagged shape, like sharp teeth. Around the smaller figure, Eloan drew a corner, 2 lines meeting like a trap or a punishment spot. Bram's pulse beat hard, but he kept his face calm. He didn't want his reaction to become her danger. Tamsin spoke softly, as if narrating a gentle story. That's a lot of strong lines, she said. Looks like someone is loud in your picture. Eloan's pencil paused. Then she nodded. Tamsin didn't ask who. She didn't ask what did he do. She didn't step into questions that could become leading. She asked something safer. When someone is loud, how does your body feel? Eloan's voice came out as a whisper, thin and tired. Small. Bram's throat tightened. He didn't speak, because he didn't want to add weight to the air. Tamsin nodded slowly. Small feels yucky, she said. No kid should have to feel small. Eloan's pencil moved again. She drew a belt, not detailed, not graphic, just a long strip with a buckle. Then she stopped like she'd gone too far. Her whole body froze. Bram saw the exact same freeze from the gate on Friday. The instinct to pull the truth back into her chest before it got her hurt. Tamsin didn't react dramatically. She didn't pounce on the drawing like it was evidence. She simply slid a small stress ball toward Eloan and said, "You're not in trouble.
You re-safe here." Eloan squeezed the ball once, twice.
Her eyes flicked to Bram. And Bram did the only thing that mattered in that moment. He made his face gentle and steady, like a lighthouse that didn't move even when the waves got loud. "You're doing a really brave thing," he said softly. "You're allowed to tell grown-ups when something hurts." Eloan's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She looked exhausted instead, like crying would cost too much. Tamsin spoke again, careful and slow. "Eloan," she said, "if someone hurts you, it is never your fault. Not ever." Eloan swallowed. Her lips trembled. Then she whispered something that wasn't a full disclosure but wasn't nothing either one of those half-steps kids took when they were testing whether truth would punish them. "He gets mad," she said. Bram's heart hammered. Tamsin nodded and kept her voice low and safe. "When he gets mad, what do you do?"
Eloan's shoulders curled inward.
"I try to be quiet." "And does being quiet keep you safe?" Tamsin asked, still not naming anyone, still not leading. Eloan's eyes dropped to the belt she'd drawn. She shook her head. The room went silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier, closer to the edge of something that could finally be said. Tamsin didn't push her over that edge. She didn't rush the moment. She knew, like Bram knew, that forcing a disclosure could break the fragile trust they'd built. Instead, Tamsin ended the check in the way you close a door gently so it doesn't slam. "Thank you for telling us what you could today," she said. "That was enough."
"You did enough."
Eloan looked up, uncertain. "Enough?" she whispered. Bram nodded. "Enough," he said. "You don't have to carry it all at once." When Eloan left the office and returned to class, Bram watched her walk down the hall with a tiny bit less stiffness, like she'd put down one invisible brick she'd been carrying. Tamsin waited until the door shut behind Eloan before she let her own composure crack just a hair. She picked up the drawing carefully and slid it into a labeled folder. "This matters," she said quietly. "It's not a full statement, but it's corroborating the siblings' disclosure. It shows fear plus a specific object. It builds the record."
Bram's hands shook slightly as he exhaled.
"And if CPS still doesn't move?" he asked. Tamsin's eyes didn't soften, but her voice did. "Then we keep stacking truth until it's too heavy to ignore," she said. "And we keep her safe here every day, until the moment we can get her somewhere safer." Bram nodded, jaw tight. Outside the counselor's office, the school day continued like always. Announcements over the intercom, kids laughing in the hall, the smell of cafeteria pizza creeping under doors. But Bram felt the shift inside himself, the line he'd crossed without fanfare. This wasn't a wait-and-see situation anymore. This was a watch closely and act fast situation. And now, finally, Eloan had drawn the thing she couldn't say out loud.
A belt. A corner.
A child who tried to be quiet and still got hurt. It wasn't the kind of proof people like to see. It was the kind of truth that arrived in pieces. And Bram knew deep in his bones that the next piece could come at any moment, and he could not afford to miss it. The shift didn't announce itself with a scream or a crash. It arrived the way danger often did in schools, quietly, disguised as routine, hiding in the gap between kids are always tired, and this is different. For 3 straight days after Eloan's drawing in Dr. Tamsin Rowe's office, Bram kept the classroom steady on purpose. He didn't change his tone. He didn't suddenly become overly sweet or overly careful in a way that would make Eloan feel like she'd done something wrong by showing them the truth in pencil lines. Instead, he built safety in ordinary moments. He greeted her the same way each morning, calm, simple, predictable. He kept the standing station ready. He offered choices without asking why. He watched, documented, and waited for the system to catch up. Tamsin did the same from her side.
Short check-ins. A feelings chart.
A notebook page that Eloan could draw on with no questions attached. Nothing that felt like an interrogation. Nothing that could be twisted into the school-planted ideas. Even the yard duty staff got quietly briefed, not with gossip, not with panic, just with awareness. "Observe," Tamsin said in the staff room, voice low, folder closed. No staring. No asking questions.
Just note anything unusual.
Clothing changes.
Walking stiffness. Flinching.
Anything she says, write it down exactly. A few teachers looked uneasy. A few looked angry at the idea that a child could be living with fear and the world could still expect more evidence. And Principal Marla Quince stood by the coffee machine with her arms folded like the whole conversation annoyed her. "I hope we're not turning this into a spectacle," Marla said afterward, pulling Bram aside near the copier. Parents talk. Rumors spread. Bram didn't argue anymore. He didn't beg. He didn't explain his heart to someone who had decided the school's reputation was a shield more important than a child's body. He simply said, "I'm turning it into a record." Marla stared at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't like. Then she walked away. On the surface, the week looked normal. Phonics worksheets, library day, a show and tell schedule taped to the wall, snowmelt running down the windows in thin, dirty streams. But Bram felt the tension humming under it all, like a power line in wind. Eloan was still standing most of the time. Still quiet. Still wary. Yet something in her had started to test the edges of trust. She would point to the feelings chart now and then. She would accept a stress ball without flinching. Once, she even giggled one bright, startled sound when Kellen misread a sentence and turned bread into beard, and declared that a fox in the story had a beard like a grandpa. The giggle made Bram's throat tighten. Because it proved something heartbreaking. She was still a child inside all that caution. Then Tuesday happened. It was one of those strange Ohio days where the sun pretended it was spring but the air still carried winter's bite. By lunchtime, kids would be asking to go outside without jackets. Teachers would be reminding them they couldn't, not yet. Eloan arrived wearing a thick sweater anyway.
Not a light cardigan.
Not something cute with a pattern. A heavy sweater, too big at the shoulders, sleeves pulled past her wrists. Bram noticed immediately because it didn't match the day. Most of the kids bounced in wearing hoodies half unzipped, cheeks pink from the chilly walk-in. Eloan came in tight, bundled, moving like every step had a cost. She didn't go to the standing station right away. She stopped behind her chair again, backpack still on, and stared at the floor like she was trying to decide where it would hurt less. Bram kept his voice even. "Morning, Eloan," he said softly. "You can use your standing spot." Eloan nodded, but it was delayed, like her brain had to pass through fear before it reached her muscles. She took 2 careful steps toward the window station, then paused and pressed her lips together hard. Bram didn't ask questions in front of the class. He didn't turn her into a moment. He simply moved closer and lowered his voice. "Do you want to go see Nurse Willa first?" he asked. Eloan's eyes flicked up quick, anxious. She shook her head. "Okay," Bram said. "You can stand. If you need to move, you can. If you need a break, you wave me over." Eloan stood on the foam mat and began tracing letters like she was trying to be perfect enough to keep the world calm. But Bram's instincts kept tightening. During reading time, Eloan's shoulders stayed hunched as if she was guarding herself. When she reached for a crayon, she did it slowly, careful, like quick movement might trigger pain. Once, when a chair scraped loudly behind her, she flinched so sharply that the pencil slipped from her fingers. Bram's hand froze on the page he was holding. That wasn't sensitive. That was learned. At recess, Bram walked outside with the class, whistle around his neck, eyes scanning the playground as usual. Kids exploded into motion, running, yelling, climbing, sliding. The wind carried their voices into the gray sky like sparrows. Eloan didn't run. She moved toward the far edge of the blacktop and stood near the building wall, the way she always did, looking out as if she was waiting for something to happen, or hoping nothing would. Tamsin was outside too, clipboard in hand like she was checking schedules, though Bram knew she was there for one reason. Bram pretended he was watching a group of boys near the basketball hoop. In reality, he kept Eloan in the corner of his vision. A few minutes into recess, Eloan crouched to pick up a small pebble, probably just to have something to do with her hands. When she bent forward, the back of her sweater rode up slightly. And Bram saw it. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just a dark, uneven line of bruising across the lower part of her back, fresh-looking, longer than a fingertip, like someone had struck in the same place more than once. Bram's stomach dropped. His body reacted before his brain finished processing. His jaw tightened, his hand curled, his chest went cold. But his face stayed calm. He walked toward Eloan at the same pace he would walk toward any child who needed help tying a shoe. He crouched beside her and kept his voice gentle. "Hey," he said. "Can you come with me for a second? We're going to get you some water." Eloan's eyes widened. "Am I in trouble?" she whispered immediately. Bram's heart clenched. That reflexum "I in trouble" told him everything he needed to know about what attention meant in her world. "No," he said firmly, softly. "Never. You're not in trouble. I just want to help your body feel okay." Eloan hesitated, then stood slowly. Her movement was stiff. Bram guided her toward the door, one step at a time. Tamsin drifted closer, expression calm but eyes sharp. She didn't speak until they were inside, where the hallway swallowed sound. "What did you see?" Tamsin murmuret. Bram didn't look at her. He kept his gaze forward in case Eloan turned and saw fear on adult faces. "Back bruising," Bram said quietly. "Fresh." Tamsin's inhale was silent, controlled. "Okay," she said. "We follow protocol." Protocol. The word that had felt useless before. Now it felt like a lever they could finally pull. They brought Eloan to Nurse Willa's office. Willa took one look at Bram's face and understood the shift without needing a long explanation. "Sweetheart," Willa said, kneeling to Eloan's level, voice warm, "I want to make sure your body is okay today. Is it all right if I check your back?" "Only if you say yes." Eloan's eyes darted between Willa and Bram, panic flickering. Bram crouched again, voice steady. "Only if you want," he said. "You in control." That sentence mattered. You could see it land confusing at first, because control wasn't something she was used to being offered, then slowly reassuring.
Eloan nodded once.
Willa closed the office door and drew the curtain around the exam area, keeping it private. Bram didn't stay in the room. He waited just outside the door with Tamsin, because even in emergencies, boundaries mattered. A minute later, Willa stepped out, face pale but professional. "It's significant," she said quietly. "Bruising consistent with being struck. We need to document and call." Tamsin didn't hesitate. "I'm calling CPS and law enforcement," she said. Bram's hands shook, but he forced them still. "I'll notify the office," he said, already moving. When Bram entered the front office, Marla Quince looked up from her computer, annoyed at being interrupted. "What is it now?" she asked. Bram's voice was calm, but it carried steel. "We have visible injuries," he said. "Documented by the nurse." Marla's expression changed, tightness creeping into her eyes, not empathy first, but fear of consequences. "You're sure?" she asked. "Yes," Bram said. "And I'm reporting."
Marla's lips pressed together.
For a second she looked like she wanted to argue, to control, to smooth it over the way she always tried. Then she didn't. Because bruises were the language the system couldn't pretend not to understand. "Fine," she snapped, already grabbing her phone. "Do what you have to do." Bram returned to the hallway where Tamsin was on the phone, voice crisp and clear, giving exact details. Willa typed notes into the health log. Every second felt like it took an hour. Eloan sat behind the nurse's curtain, small on the exam cot, sweater clutched in her lap like armor. Bram could hear her breathing tight, shallow through the thin fabric divider. He wanted to go in and promise everything. He wanted to say, "This ends today." But he didn't promise what he couldn't control. He stayed nearby. Present. Steady. Within 20 minutes, Officer Sloane Merritt arrived again, same calm eyes, same controlled posture. This time, her expression was different. "Less we'll see. More we have to act." She spoke with Nurse Willa first, reviewing documentation. Then she spoke to Tamsin. Then she looked at Bram. "You did the right thing calling again," Merritt said quietly. Bram's throat tightened. "I wish I'd had more than instincts earlier," he admitted.
Merritt shook her head.
"Instinct kept you watching," she said.
"Watching got us here."
A CPS investigator arrived shortly after, a woman named Dana Pike, carrying a tablet and a calm face that looked practiced in grief. Dana spoke with the nurse, then asked to speak with Eloan with Tamsin present. Bram stayed outside the room. He didn't want Eloan to feel surrounded. He didn't want her to think she'd done something wrong by being hurt. He waited by the water fountain, hands folded, trying to breathe. The door opened, and Tamsin stepped out first, eyes glossy but controlled. Dana followed, face professional. "We're initiating emergency protective custody," Dana said quietly to Bram and Tamsin. "Given the documented injuries and the pattern of concerns, she cannot be released to the caregiver today." Bram's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. He knew this was the goal, safety, but it still felt like stepping into a storm. Because protective custody wasn't a happy ending. It was a doorway into a whole new kind of fear.
"What about pickup?"
Bram asked. "Her stepfather usually comes." Dana nodded. "We'll handle that," she said. "We will attempt to contact the mother. If the stepfather shows up, law enforcement will be present. The child will not be handed over." Bram swallowed. "Does Eloan know?" he asked. Tamsin's voice was soft. "We told her she's going to a safe place for a little while," she said. "No scary words. No blame." Bram nodded. His hands were shaking again. Officer Merritt remained on campus, positioned near the front entrance like quiet protection. The office staff was told to keep dismissal procedures calm. No announcements. No gossip. No hallway whispers. At 3:10, Dax Rourke arrived. Bram saw him through the glass doors before Dax saw him. Dax's posture was the same, arms crossed, impatient face, a man who expected compliance. Officer Merritt stepped forward before he reached the counter.
Mr.
Rourke, she said, voice even. We need to speak with you.
Dax's eyes narrowed.
What is this? He snapped.
Where is Elowen?
Dana Pike emerged from the hallway, badge visible. Elowen is safe, Dana said. She will not be released to you today.
Dax's face darkened, the impatience turning into something sharper.
That's my kid, he growled. Officer Merritt didn't raise her voice. She didn't escalate. She simply stepped into a position that made the boundaries clear. She is not being released, Merritt repeated. If you have concerns, you can speak with CPS through the proper channels. Dax took a half step forward, then stopped when he noticed another officer entering through the side hall. The calculation in his eyes was quick anger wrestling with self-preservation. This is ridiculous, he spat, voice rising. She's fine. Kids bruise. What, she fall off a swing and now you're kidnapping her? Dana's face didn't change. We have documented injuries, she said. You may contact legal counsel. You are not permitted to take her. Dax's gaze flicked around the lobby, realizing he didn't have control here. The school, for once, wasn't going to fold for his volume. He leaned toward the counter and hissed, Reese is gonna hear about this. Please do notify her, Dana said evenly. We've attempted contact and will continue. Dax backed away, muttering insults under his breath, and left the building with a stomp that echoed down the corridor. Bram watched from a distance, body tight, heart pounding, because he knew what that stomp meant, rage looking for a place to land. When the building finally quieted, Dana returned to the nurse's office with Tamsin and Bram. Elowen sat on the cot, sweater back on, sleeves still pulled down. Her eyes were wide and glassy, not crying, just staring as if the day had become too big to process. Bram crouched near the doorway so she could see him without feeling cornered. Elowen, he said softly. You're going to go with MS. Dana for a little while. She takes kids to places where they're safe. Elowen's voice was tiny. Am I bad? She whispered. Bram's chest tightened so hard it felt like it might crack. No, he said firmly. You are not bad. Not even a little. What happened to you is not your fault. Elowen's hands twisted the hem of her sweater. Will he be mad? She asked. Tamsin moved closer, kneeling on the other side so Elowen wasn't staring into a void of adult faces. You are not responsible for his feelings, she said gently. Adults are responsible for keeping kids safe. Elowen blinked, like she didn't understand the concept. Dana spoke softly, practiced. We're going to a place with other kids and grown-ups who are kind, she said. You'll have a bed. Food. Quiet. You can bring something with you, maybe your notebook? Or a stuffed animal if you have one here. Elowen looked around as if the question was confusing. She didn't have a stuffed animal at school. She didn't have the kind of comfort item other kids carried.
Bram thought fast.
He stepped to his desk and pulled out a small paper bag of supplies he kept for kids who needed them: new crayons, blank sketch paper, a little notebook with a soft cover. He returned and held it out, not forcing it into her hands. I thought you might want these, he said. For drawing.
Whenever your feelings get too loud.
Elowen stared at the bag like it was something precious and suspicious. Then she took it with both hands. Her grip was careful, like she was afraid someone would yank it away. Bram swallowed the burn in his throat. You did something brave today, he said softly.
You let us help.
Eloan whispered, I didn't do anything. Bram shook his head gently. You stayed alive, he said.
That counts.
Dana guided Eloan out through a quiet side exit to avoid the main pickup crowd. Officer Merritt walked nearby, not looming, not scary, just present. Tamsin followed, carrying a folder of paperwork. Bram stayed at the door until the car pulled away, watching Eloan's small silhouette in the back seat, clutching the paper bag like it was the first thing that belonged only to her. The school felt too quiet afterward. Even the fluorescent hum sounded louder. That evening, Bram didn't go home right away. He sat in his classroom with the lights off, staring at the little chair at Eloan's desk. The chair wasn't evil. It was just wood and metal. But it had become a symbol of what she'd been forced to carry in silence. Tamsin called him around 7:40. They placed her at a temporary child shelter, she said.
Safe bed tonight.
They'll schedule a full medical evaluation and trauma-informed interview through the Child Advocacy Center. Bram's jaw tightened. Is she okay? He asked. Tamsin's voice softened. She's scared, she said honestly. But she's safe. Safe. The word Bram had been chasing all week. On Thursday, Bram got permission to visit. He didn't bring balloons or loud comfort. He brought what Eloan had chosen to trust: paper, pencils, and quiet. The shelter was a plain building with a buzz-in door and a waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and microwaved soup. A staff member led him down a hallway to a small reading corner with beanbags and a shelf of battered kids' books. Eloan sat on the floor, knees drawn up, coloring with a blue pencil. When she saw Bram, she didn't run. She didn't smile widely. But her shoulders dropped like her body recognized one safe adult and allowed itself to breathe. Hi, Eloan, Bram said, lowering himself onto the floor at a respectful distance.
Eloan's voice was barely louder than air.
Hi. Bram held up a small spiral notebook. I brought you a new one, he said. This one is just yours.
No one takes it.
No one yells about it. Eloan stared at it. Then she reached out and touched the cover with one finger, like she needed proof it was real. Can I keep it? She asked. Yes, Bram said, steady. You can keep it. Eloan's eyes shone, and she blinked fast like she didn't want tears to show. After a long moment, she whispered, He can't come here? Bram kept his voice firm, not dramatic. No, he said. He can't. Eloan stared down at her drawing. Her hand trembled slightly. Then she said something that wasn't a story and wasn't a confession, just the truth of a child's logic. I tried to be quiet, she whispered. I tried so hard. Bram felt the sting behind his eyes and forced it back. He didn't want to cry in front of her in a way that made her feel responsible for his feelings. He leaned forward just enough to be warm, not enough to crowd. You should never have had to try that, he said. Adults are supposed to be quiet with kids. Gentle. Safe. Eloan's pencil moved again. She drew a small house with 2 windows.
Then she drew a sun-simple circle, straight rays.
No chair. No corner. No belt. Bram's chest loosened, just slightly, at the sight of it. A staff member appeared at the doorway to remind him of time limits. Bram nodded, then looked back at Eloan. I'll come again when I'm allowed, he said. And Dr. Rowe will keep checking on you too. Eloan hesitated, then asked, Do I have to go back? Bram didn't lie. He didn't promise what the court and CPS would decide. He chose the truest safe answer. You don't have to decide that today, he said. Today you just have to be safe. That's your job now. Eloan stared at him for a long moment. Then, very quietly, she said, "Okay." It wasn't a happy ending yet. It wasn't closure. But it was something Bram hadn't heard from her in the classroom at the beginning of all this.
Acceptance without fear.
When Bram left the shelter, the sky outside was the color of steel, the air cold enough to bite. He stood in the parking lot for a moment with his hands in his pockets, breathing hard like he'd run a mile. He didn't feel victorious. He felt exhausted, angry, relieved, and determined all at once. Because now the system was moving. Now there was documentation. Now there was a protective order in progress. Now Eloan was sleeping in a bed where no one shouted her name like a weapon. And Bram knew, with a clarity that sat heavy and steady in his chest, that even if the next chapters got complicated court dates, supervised visits, paperwork, setbacks, one thing had already changed. Eloan had left the house where fear lived. And for the first time, the adults around her were finally treating her silence like the emergency it always was. The first thing Bram Kessler learned after Eloan left Cedar Hollow in protective custody was that safety is not a single decision. It's a chain. And every link in that chain is made by people who have to keep choosing the harder option again, and again, and again until the danger no longer has easy access to a child. The morning after Eloan was placed in temporary care, Bram walked into room 12 and felt the absence like a missing tooth. Her desk sat exactly where it always had, the small chair tucked in, the floor mat by the window station still there because Bram couldn't bring himself to put it away yet. The room looked normal, but the air didn't. Kids asked questions the way kids always do when a classmate disappears.
Where is Eloan?
Is she sick? Did she move? Did she get in trouble? Bram's throat tightened at the last one. He kept his expression gentle and steady. "Eloan is safe," he said, choosing every word like it mattered because it did. "She won't be here for a little while. Sometimes grown-ups need to help families fix things.
That's all you need to know."
A few kids nodded and moved on, attention already bouncing to the next thing. But one or two glanced at Eloan's empty spot with the quiet seriousness children sometimes have when they don't fully understand something but they can feel the weight of it. Bram carried on with reading groups and math centers and all the ordinary work that kept a classroom from turning into a waiting room for bad news. He smiled when he was supposed to smile. He praised when he was supposed to praise. But every time he glanced at the door, he felt the same pulse of worry. Is the system still moving? Or did it slow down the moment she wasn't visible to us anymore?
Doctor.
Tamsin Rowe kept him updated as much as confidentiality allowed. The updates came in short bursts between sessions, between meetings, between calls with agencies that never seemed to have enough staff for the number of kids who needed help. Eloan completed a full medical evaluation, Tamsin told Bram 2 days later in the hallway, voice low. They're scheduling a trauma-informed interview at the Child Advocacy Center. Bram nodded once. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need details to know what kind of courage that would demand from a 6-year-old who had spent years learning that speaking could be punished.
What about Jude?
Bram asked, because the boy's face at the doorway had never left his mind. Tamsin's eyes softened. CPS located him at the home, she said. He's not attending school, which they're addressing. He's been placed temporarily as well, but not in the same home for now different age group. They're working on sibling contact. Bram exhaled slowly, trying not to imagine Jude alone with guilt he didn't deserve. And then there was the other missing piece, Reese Grant, Eloan's mother. At first, Reese wouldn't answer calls. Her phone went straight to voicemail. The address on file was the same dim house Bram had visited, but when investigators went out the next day, Reese wasn't there. Dax Rourke wasn't there either. The home looked half abandoned, like people had left quickly and didn't want to be found. When Officer Sloane Merritt returned to Cedar Hollow to collect additional documentation, she looked more tired than before. Not emotionally tired, work tired. The kind of tired people get when they've seen the same pattern too many times. Step-parent is not cooperating, Merritt told Bram quietly in the lobby. He's claiming the school overreacted. Mother is non-responsive. We're escalating. Escalating how? Bram asked, careful not to sound like he was trying to direct an investigation. Merritt's gaze held his. We'll do what we can legally, she said. But this is where documentation matters most. Every log. Every date. Every observed change. It's all part of the picture. Bram nodded. That was what he'd been building piece by piece because intuition didn't hold up in court, but patterns did. That weekend, the first real crack in the wall came from somewhere Bram didn't expect, the school's front office. Monday morning, a secretary approached him with a plain envelope in her hand. This was left at the desk, she said. No return address. Just your name. Bram felt his heartbeat spike. He took the envelope, turned it over. No stamp. No postmark. Someone had dropped it off on purpose. He carried it to Tamsin's office without opening it. He didn't want to contaminate anything. He didn't want to handle evidence in a way that complicated an already fragile case. Tamsin shut her door, then nodded for Bram to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, creased like it had been folded and unfolded too many times. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, as if the writer had been afraid of being caught. Bram read it once. His mouth went dry. He read it again, slower. It was from Reese. It wasn't a confession, and it wasn't a clean explanation. It was something messier and more human, a woman trying to tell the truth while still trapped inside fear. Reese wrote that Dax had threatened her, that she'd been scared to speak, that she'd believed him when he said he'd take Aloan where no one could find her if Reese opened her mouth. Reese wrote that she didn't know how to leave safely, that she'd been controlled, watched, isolated. She wrote that she didn't want Aloan hurt anymore. She wrote that she was hiding, that she had a location, an old place behind a closed-down warehouse near the industrial strip where she could be found if police came quickly. Bram's hands began to shake. Tamsin didn't waste a second. She took the paper, photographed it for a record, then called Officer Merritt and CPS from her desk, calm voice, precise facts. This is Dr. Tamsin Rowe, she said. We received a written note addressed to a staff member. It appears to be from the child's mother. It contains a location and a request for help. Merritt arrived less than an hour later with a plainclothes investigator and took the note as evidence. She asked Bram where the envelope had been delivered, who touched it, what time it arrived, whether anyone saw who dropped it off. Bram answered carefully, clearly, sticking to facts. Before Merritt left, she looked at Bram and said something he didn't expect. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, she said. Not everyone does. Some people keep quiet because it's easier. Bram's throat tightened. It's never easier for the kid, he said. Merritt gave a single nod and walked out like she had a fire to chase. That afternoon, Bram tried to teach long division to kids who still counted on their fingers. He tried to smile at jokes that didn't feel funny. He kept checking the clock, hating himself for it, because waiting for news about a child's safety felt like holding your breath underwater. At 5:42 p.m., his phone buzzed. It was Tamsin. They found Reese, she said immediately. Her voice sounded both relieved and raw. She's alive. She's in protective custody. She's cooperating. Bram's knees went weak for a moment, and he had to sit down on the edge of a chair at his kitchen table. Was she hurt? He asked, then regretted it. It wasn't his business. Tamsin heard the regret and answered gently anyway. "She's shaken," she said. "She's getting medical care and a trauma evaluation. She's safe right now." Bram let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in him for a week. "And Dax?" Bram asked quietly. Tamsin paused. "Not in custody yet," she said. "But with Reese's statement, plus everything we documented, they're moving fast." The next 48 hours were a blur of official movement. Reese gave a formal statement at the station. The Child Advocacy Center scheduled Eloan's forensic interview with a specialist trained to speak to children without leading them. The prosecutor's office reviewed the nurse's documentation, the school logs, and the timeline. A judge signed the first set of emergency orders, temporary protective custody continued, and an immediate no-contact order was issued for Dax Rourke. Bram didn't see most of that firsthand. He wasn't supposed to. His role was still teacher, still mandated reporter, still support not investigator. But he felt the gears turning because the calls became more frequent, the hallway conversations more purposeful, the paperwork thicker. And then came the arrest. Officer Merritt called Tamsin after the fact, and Tamsin told Bram the next morning, voice careful but relieved. "They took him in near his brother's auto shop," she said. "He tried to argue. He tried to blame Eloan. But he's in custody." Bram closed his eyes for a second and let his shoulders drop. Not because it erased what had happened. Because it ended the immediate access. That same week, Bram was asked to provide a formal statement to the prosecutor. He sat in a small office downtown across from an assistant district attorney named Keegan Voss, a person whose calm voice didn't match how heavy the subject was. Keegan didn't ask Bram to speculate. He asked Bram to do what Bram had already trained himself to do, reconstruct the facts with precision. "Tell me what she said verbatim. Tell me what you observed. Tell me the dates. Tell me who else saw what you saw." Bram answered, reading directly from his logs when needed. He watched Keegan's pen move across a yellow legal pad like a metronome. Every detail Bram had captured: the standing, the fear, the drawing, the sibling statement, the bruises. The pickup interaction became part of a clean, chronological story the system could finally hold. When Bram finished, Keegan looked up and said, "You made this much easier to prove." Bram didn't feel proud. He felt sick that proving it was even necessary. At the Child Advocacy Center, Eloan's interview was conducted the way it should be: gentle, structured, age-appropriate, in a room that looked more like a playroom than an interrogation room. A specialist spoke with Eloan while a small team observed from another room through a one-way mirror so Eloan wouldn't have to repeat her story again and again to different adults. Bram didn't attend. He wasn't allowed to, and it wasn't his place. But Tamsin told him one thing afterward that Bram carried like a candle in his chest. "Eloan spoke," Tamsin said quietly. "Not every detail. Not everything at once. But she spoke enough." The juvenile court hearing came first, focused on custody and protection, not punishment. Bram wasn't required to testify that day, but he was allowed to attend as a support person if the court approved it. Eloan's advocate requested that Bram be present at a distance, not as her savior, not as a replacement parent, but as a steady, familiar adult in the room. Bram sat behind Eloan with Tamsin near the aisle, hands clasped, heart pounding. Eloan wore a navy dress and a small gold star pin her advocate had given her something to hold when her hands wanted to shake. The judge, Althea Fenwick, spoke gently, not in the booming way people imagined courtrooms to be, but in a calm, controlled tone designed to keep children from breaking. "Eloan," Judge Fenwick said, "you're not in trouble. You're here because adults are responsible for keeping children safe." Eloan's voice was small, but it didn't vanish. She spoke about fear. About trying to be quiet. About pain and the way her body reacted before her words could. She didn't use adult language. She didn't need to. Her truth came out in 6-year-old terms, and it was enough. When Judge Fenwick asked if Eloan wanted to see her mother, Eloan hesitated. The room went still. "I miss her," Eloan whispered. "But I don't want to go back yet." Judge Fenwick nodded like she respected that boundary. "That's a wise answer," she said. "You will remain in protective care. Your mother may have supervised visits as recommended by your care team. The no-contact order remains in effect for Mr.
Rourke."
Reese sat off to the side with a victim advocate, eyes wet, hands clasped so tight her knuckles looked pale. She didn't rush Eloan. She didn't beg. For the first time, she stayed where the adults told her to stay, like she was learning, too, that love without safety wasn't enough. In the following weeks, Jude was enrolled again, this time with support services and a case plan, not just a schedule. He and Eloan were allowed supervised sibling contact, short visits where staff made sure neither child had to manage adult emotions. Jude didn't say much at first. He looked older than 10. He carried guilt like a backpack. One day, during a supervised visit, Jude whispered to Eloan, "I'm sorry I didn't stop him." Eloan stared at him, then did something that made the staff member's eyes glisten. She took Jude's hand and said, "We're out now." It wasn't a perfect sentence. It was a lifeline. When the criminal case moved forward, Dax Rourke's defense tried the usual strategies, minimizing, blaming stress, claiming exaggeration, suggesting the child was confused. But the paper trail didn't bend. The medical documentation didn't disappear. The consistent reports from 2 mandated reporters didn't evaporate. Reese's statement didn't collapse under cross-examination. The story stayed the same because it had been true from the beginning. Bram didn't celebrate when the sentencing date arrived. He didn't feel triumphant walking past a courthouse. He felt the way people feel when they've watched something wrong finally be named as wrong, relieved, yes, but also heavy, because naming doesn't undo. Still, the judge's final order mattered. Dax Rourke was convicted of child abuse-related charges and sentenced. A permanent no-contact order was entered. Eloan remained under protective supervision with a long-term plan. Reese was ordered into services parenting classes, trauma therapy, monitored stability requirements before any reunification could be considered. Jude received educational and counseling supports as part of the case plan. After court, Reese didn't approach Eloan dramatically. She didn't make Eloan hold her feelings. She spoke to Eloan's advocate and asked how to do it right. It was small, imperfect progress, but it was progress that didn't demand Eloan carry adult forgiveness on tiny shoulders. And then, one morning in early spring, the call came that Bram had almost stopped believing would ever arrive. Eloan was returning to school part-time at first, with accommodations, a support plan, and a safe drop-off procedure that didn't involve surprise adults at the gate. Bram stood at the classroom door at 8:15 a.m. and watched a staff member walk Eloan down the hallway. Eloan looked different, not magically healed, not suddenly bubbly, but different in a way Bram recognized as precious. Her eyes weren't scanning for danger as sharply. Her shoulders weren't pulled up to her ears. She held her backpack straps, but not like a lifeline. Bram kept his face warm and normal. "Good morning, Eloan," he said, exactly the way he said it before, because she deserved to re-enter a world that felt routine, not like a spotlight. Eloan nodded. Then she glanced at her desk. The chair was there, unchanged. For a second Bram saw a flash of the old fear, her body remembering. He didn't speak. He didn't rush. He let her decide. Eloan walked to her desk slowly, put her backpack down, and stood behind the chair. Her fingers touched the backrest lightly as if the chair might bite. Bram stayed at a respectful distance, hands at his sides, heartbeat pounding. Eloan swallowed. Then she pulled the chair out. Not dramatically. Not as a performance. Just quietly, with determination. She turned, lowered herself into the seat carefully, and sat. Her face tightened for half a second, then relaxed. Eloan looked up at Bram, her voice small but steady. "Today it doesn't hurt."
Bram's vision blurred.
He forced himself to keep his voice calm, because the last thing he wanted was for his emotion to become her responsibility. "I'm glad," he said softly. "I'm really glad."
Eloan's mouth curved, not a big grin, not a showy moment, just a real, clean little smile.
And Bram understood something in that smile that no court order could capture. This wasn't just about removing a child from danger. It was about giving her a body that could stop bracing for impact. It was about giving her a chair that could become a chair again. After class, Tamsin stepped into Bram's doorway and watched Eloan quietly color at her desk like any other kid. "She did it," Tamsin whispered. Bram nodded once, throat tight. "She did."
Tamsin's eyes shone.
"So did you," she said. Bram shook his head gently. "The system finally did," he replied. "And she survived long enough for it to." Tamsin didn't argue, because she knew the truth inside his truth. Systems moved because people pushed them, and people pushed because a child's fear mattered more than adult comfort. Later that afternoon, as the class packed up, Eloan slipped a piece of paper onto Bram's desk. A drawing.
A small house.
A sun.
2 stick figures holding hands.
This time, next to the house, Eloan had drawn a chair not surrounded by blotches, not hidden, not frightening. Just a chair. Bram stared at it for a long moment. Eloan lingered beside his desk, not looking at him directly. She said, almost casually, as if she was practicing what normal sounded like, "I like school." Bram swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "I'm happy you're here," he said. Eloan nodded once, then joined the line for dismissal, walking out of room 12 with the small, quiet miracle of a child who no longer had to stand to survive. And when Bram turned off the classroom lights that evening, the emptiness didn't feel the same. Because for the first time since that first sentence, "I can't sit," it hurts, Bram could picture Eloan's future as something other than a warning. Not perfect. Not easy. But possible.